legislative advocacy look like for us at the state level. And so as we go into our introduction, I just want to introduce the mission for the council. So the Minnesota legislature empowered the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage to ensure that people of African heritage fully and effectively participate in and equitably benefit from the political, social, and economic resources, policies, and procedures of the state of Minnesota. So the Council for Minnesotans of African Heritage is a state ethnic council that was created by the legislature in 1980. And so when it comes to our mission, we're really here as an advisory space to the governor and the state legislature, and really making sure that our community is represented in the work that is happening at the Capitol. To briefly talk about the work of the council, so we do a mixture of statewide community outreach and engagement, which is largely in my wheels as the outreach coordinator. Situations like this, the conversations with the council. We're also doing a lot of work in greater Minnesota. I'm also doing a lot of different work throughout the year to really make sure that our community members are really involved in the process here at the state level. In addition, we advance legislative policies with a direct impact on the African heritage community. So my counterpart the screen is gone. I will get us back in here. All right. All right, we're back in. Great. So really making sure that our community is well versed on how the Capitol works, making sure that we are kept up to date on different bills that are moving, the different work that our state departments are doing, things of that nature. And then also advising lawmakers and executive leadership, as I mentioned before, making sure that our governor and the governor's office, our legislative leadership, and other lawmakers, especially working a lot with our African heritage lawmakers, are really in tune to the things that we are hearing in the community when it comes to the work that needs to be done to advocate and to serve our communities. So I'm going to start now with our introductions of our panelists. First, I'm going to start with Salma Hussein, who is the assistant principal at Central High School in St. Paul. Excited for that's a new role from what I know. And just as a sidebar, I have known Salma like almost my entire time here in Minnesota since my early days in community organizing. So I'm really excited to have you here, Salma. So Salma is an experienced school equity and social emotional learning leader. She has a master's degree in social work and is passionate about securing resources, transforming school cultures, and implementing effective programs for girls and women. She currently works as an assistant principal at Central High School in St. Paul Public Schools, where she brings compassion, connection, and calm to her work in helping students know their uniqueness, brilliance, and potential. So I'm excited to have you here, Salma. Next, I'd like to introduce Michael V. Walker, who I've always heard amazing things about, the director of the Office of Black Male Student Achievement in Minneapolis Public Schools. Michael V. Walker brings a career focus on youth development and assisting Black youth to achieve success. He earned his undergraduate degree in physical education from Southwest Minnesota State University and his master's degree in counseling from the University of Wisconsin River Falls, as well as his administrative and superintendent license from St. Cloud State. He is currently pursuing his PhD at the University of Minnesota in organizational leadership, policy, and development. Come on, get all them letters next to your name. From 1998 to 2006, Walker served as the Community Outreach Program and Youth Development Director at the YMCA of Minneapolis and Greater St. Paul, where he developed programs for school, academic, athletic, and employment skills for youth, and served as a coordinator for the Black Achievers Program, an academic achievement and career development initiative for middle school and high school youth. He has worked As a career and college center coordinator at Achieve Minneapolis, I am a Achieve alum as well. At Roosevelt High from 06 to 09 before serving as the Minneapolis Public Schools Dean of Students at Roosevelt from 09 to 11, and then became the assistant principal from 11 to 14. He has taken on being the director of the Office of Black Male Student Achievement for the past 3 years, where his sole responsibility is changing the academic outcomes for Black males who attend Minneapolis Public Schools. He is the founder and CEO of Critical Question Consulting, where he has worked with local districts and across the country to provide a framework and professional development workshops designed for supporting Black males. Being a 2017 Bush Fellow recipient, he has allowed him to further his leadership and expertise in this area. He is an unapologetic advocate for Black males and works towards reducing the belief gap in the area's schools. He is a product of Minneapolis Public Schools, and he leaves us with this critical question to the educational system: why have we been trying to hold a non-academic issue with an academic solution? That's deep. So thank y'all, and please welcome Michael V. Walker to our panel. Our last two panelists I know and love and have been getting to know and love. Mrs. Stephanie Whitehorn, who is a parent and a community advocate from Rochester. I thought it was really important to have a parent's voice on the panel. And she is fierce. When I tell you all she is fierce, get ready. Mrs. Stephanie Whitehorn was born in New Jersey and raised there for the majority of her life. She transitioned to the Rochester area in 1997 with her father, who transferred there to work for IBM. She completed her last 2 years of high school at Mayo High and graduated in 2000. She describes this experience as an eye-opening culture shock. Since then, she's lived in Chicago and several small cities near the Rochester area. She's happily married to the love of her life, William Bud Whitehorn, where they have a beautiful blended family that consists of 6 kings and 2 queens in training. I hope she hopes to bring to this discussion a voice that is often unheard as it becomes lost in bureaucracy and politics. Furthermore, these voices are ignored due to the emotional rawness that accompanies the expression of the need for help. Her goal is to assist in creating the bridge that allows for the descendants of slaves to receive the resources that they need, and she stands to encourage self-advocacy and education. So I'm super excited for Stephanie to be here. Then to round out, Malcolm Wells, who is an artist, an educator, an organizer, a co-conspirator, and also works for employee relations at Minneapolis Public Schools. So Malcolm comes from Cobb County, Georgia. He is in his 6th year working in Minneapolis Public Schools. Malcolm has worked as an ESP, or educational service professional, serving in the roles of special education assistant and associate educator before joining human resources at MPS in their labor relations department as an employee relations associate. Malcolm also served as an at-large member for the ESP executive board of the local Minneapolis Federation of Teachers 59, where he also organized and led campaigns around contract negotiations, member and community engagement. As an educator, Malcolm values the mantra of forever remaining a student. When he's not engaging in one of his roles, you can find him reading or practicing music on the synthesizer. Also, he's a plant dad. You'll probably catch him at a high school sports event, a local show supporting some of his favorite artists, or at a restaurant to enjoy a good meal with some of his favorite people. So I am super excited to have all 4 of you all here today. We're going to have a really great conversation talking about the landscape of education for Minnesota's African heritage community. Obviously, this is a big topic of conversation right now as we are still navigating the COVID-19 pandemic, and we just heard the announcement about school guidance going into the fall from the governor last week. And so there's a lot to process, there's a lot to talk about, but also we know before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, we know that our communities have already been struggling within this education system for a very long time. And you all are not new to that. You all have been navigating that for decades. And so your expertise is going to be very much valued in this conversation. So throughout the conversation, for people who are tuning in through Zoom or Facebook, please share your questions. There will be different moments throughout our conversation where we will ask questions of our panelists, and I would love to also incorporate questions from the audience as well. We're going to have two sections. The first is focusing on the landscape. So we're going to talk about what the issues are. And then we're going to focus on the work. We want to talk about what the policy solution should be, particularly as we are a state agency and that's where we kind of operate in our lane. We want to get a good informed opinion on where the things that we can pursue at the state level. So without further ado, let's get started. So the first thing we're going to do is talk about the landscape, education in Minnesota's African heritage community. So before our panelists came to us today, we asked them to do a couple of opening statements for each section so that they can talk a little bit about the work and the landscape from their vantage point as it relates to the education landscape. And so I'm going to get this started by asking our first panelist to talk about, briefly discuss the work that they do in the education system in Minnesota and their assessment of education in the African heritage community in Minnesota from their vantage point, whether it's being an administrator, an educator, a social worker, a parent. What is their assessment? Each panelist will have 3 minutes for this statement. And now we are going to turn it over to Malcolm, who's going to start us off.
Peace, y'all. Thank you, Amber. Shout out everybody that's on here. Like, pretty much know like a few of y'all. I would say for my personal experience working in education, originally not being from here, not being from Minnesota, I've had the opportunity to like go to school abroad. I graduated high school overseas, so I've kind of dabbed in like different things. I'm actually like, and I went to like some grade school in Georgia, but here in Minnesota, I think my biggest experience, the landscape now, especially after working in schools and now like working at a district office, is seeing the relationship between like the community and like what actually takes place within classrooms. I think there's a large disconnect, and that disconnect seems to be very intentional for me, from my experience, like the relationships that our parents have with the teachers in classrooms, to understanding what goes on the day-to-day. There's a large, I don't want to say miseducation, but there's a misunderstanding, definitely. And what it looks like to actually get both community and parents involved into that space, I think is one of the biggest disadvantages now. Coming out of Georgia and like, or going up down south, like parents and family involvement is very much incorporated into like the public education system. I think that's because there's a longer line of institutional maybe just acceptance of having Black folks being in administration, but there's still like those ills, and that I think plague public education is that disconnect from the classroom. And I think that's where one of the first places that we need to start. But yeah, that's where I'm at.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you so much, Malcolm. We're going to turn it over to our next panelist, Salma, to give her opening statement.
Thank you so much, Amber. It is so good to see you, and to the rest of the panel members. I'm honored to share the space with you all, especially with you, Stephanie White-Harn. It's so important to have parent perspective. I honestly believe that in education, we have an opportunity to partner with our communities to amplify and really fund programs such as the Office of Black Student Achievement. Prior to my role at where I'm at right now at Central High School, I worked at South High School, and I saw the magic that happened in the Black culture classes, and it really hurts me to know that there's only 2 sections of that class, because it is fundamentally necessary for every brown and Black child to be in that space, to have a Black instructor who speaks life to them, that empowers them. I think what's missing in education today is the misinformation and just the intentionality of really connecting with kids, really seeing the humanity of our children, not pathologizing the children, knowing that the gaps that exist is not because of the children, it's because of the injustice, right? And I think if we can, in this time, create opportunity for authentic conversation, and if we can give folks like Michael Walker the opportunity to lead with what he knows from experience. I attended Roosevelt High School in '07, and I remember you, Michael. So it makes me really happy to see the work that you're doing, and to know that there will now be a Queens section of that class, because that's what's missing in public education. Spaces where our Black and brown children can be affirmed, can be celebrated, can be loved for who they are. So they know that the poverty that they're living in, that the struggle that they're experiencing, that the trauma that they're experiencing is no fault of their own. And I'm really hopeful that our white co-conspirators, because titles are nothing, right? We don't need people to take on the title of co-conspirator. We want them to step aside, allow people to lead, and really move away from feeling shame. Brene Brown talks a whole lot about shame and feeling like people are bad. When we talk about racism, we're not saying white people are bad. We're saying institutional racism is bad. So we need people to move away from shame, maybe sit a little bit in guilt, process whatever feelings they have, and commit to doing better and being better.
Thank you so much, Salma. We're going to turn it over now to Michael Walker to give his opening statement.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. Obviously, I'm glad to be with the panelists and then all the folks from the community who are tuning into this. I'd like to start off with just using our mission statement for the Office of Black Student Achievement. So it was Black Male Student Achievement, but now it's Black Student Achievement because we are working with our queens now. So I'm excited about that. So our mission statement goes, we exist to awaken the greatness within Black students in MPS, to have them determined to believe and achieve success as defined by their own values and dreams. And that's really how we operate and navigate through our educational system. Like, our role is to really push back on those structures that have upheld white supremacy and have discredited the Black experience within our school systems. And so we want to bring that to the forefront in the work that we do. And so one of the ways we do that is by creating this class that we have called Black, which stands for Building Lives, Acquiring Cultural Knowledge. Very intentional about using the term Black because in so many other areas it's used as negative, but I want to make sure that we use it as in a positive way. Some of the work is also focusing on educators, right? It's about how do we start to change mindsets and beliefs of educators. And I think that's one of the key components of this. I'm gonna go out on a limb and say, I trust that the educators understand their content. They know their content well, math, science, social studies, English, right? Some things that haven't been so direct in our teaching or schooling that we went through is how to build those authentic relationships with students and young people. And that's where I think the disconnect comes. Do our students feel like they are valued in these spaces? Do they feel like people really truly know me and want to know me and will accept and appreciate my experiences when I bring them to the table? And so that's what I see as something that is an obstacle for our African American heritage community, is that we have to make sure that we are preparing and that the system is ready to hear our truth, right? And that truth can be whatever it is. It's just, can you hear it and accept it? So I'll stop there because I sure have a lot to say, but I'll let other folks talk now.
I was gonna say, we're a couple minutes ahead, so. But thank you, Michael. And then to round it out, Stephanie, you can just introduce yourself and give your opening statement.
Hi, everybody. I am Stephanie Whitehorn, Mrs. Stephanie Whitehorn. And I'm a parent here in Rochester, Minnesota. As Amber said, I am big on self-advocacy, on really teaching our people how to learn how to speak up for themselves. I have a few unique perspectives because I've had some very unique situations here in Rochester that is going to be a little different from Minneapolis. And, you know, I think it's important that Rochester is included in this conversation because we have a huge gap here. We have a huge, huge gap here. You know, I'm just going to put it out there. I don't think that the children of color are getting the same shake. They're not getting the same fair treatment. So this is why I'm trying to be a part of this conversation. You know, unfortunately, all parents don't have the ability to advocate for themselves. So they kind of get pushed around. A lot of the children of color here are in, what do they call it, the stage 3 or whatever classes, where they don't move from room to room. They've been diagnosed with all type of stuff, behavior, emotional stuff I ain't never even heard of. Got these kids sitting in this room because they don't have people, they don't have educators, they don't have allies that are willing to sympathize with them and understand some of the traumas that these children have experienced coming here from, you know, big cities, south side of Chicago, even coming here from Minneapolis areas and moving into a predominantly white suburban area is a culture shock. You know, I moved here in 1998, and there was 3 Black girls in my whole class at Mayo High School. It shocked me. I came here from New Jersey. I'm talking long SWB nails, lime green, stretch pants and clogs. I look like a horsefly in buttermilk. Okay. And it was a very unsettling experience for me because I was not an uneducated girl. You know, I only wore my nails part of the year because I played the violin professionally. I had several things that, you know, I was doing in my life and I wasn't able to really get that recognition here. Just for a quick example, moving here, we were transferred here with IBM. And when my mother came down to set me up, I remember they called a meeting and they told my mother, they said, well, Miss Jones, what you need to do is you don't need to keep putting money in your daughter's lunch account because apparently you haven't been down to get your medical assistance so that she can get free lunch. I've never gotten free lunch. I lived in a house all my life. My parents worked very hard to provide for us. And that was a statement that was made in front of me with my parents present as a young girl. So, you know, there is that mentality here. So I just want to be in part of these conversations to be able to express the voice for those who don't speak up for themselves, the voiceless, the people that are just getting shuffled and pushed through the system. And, you know, to be that voice to recognize you got to care about those other kids. They are our future. Nobody cares about the kids that get pushed through the system until they done shot up somebody's house or they done did something to hurt one of your precious babies. Now you want to know why these kids were not educated or why nobody stepped in. The time to step in is now. The time to step in is now. So I just want to be that voice for those people. And like I said, my husband and I, we do a program called Hustlers Anonymous. We try to get out into the community. We try to speak with the people, see what it is that people need. We try to meet people where they are. And I think no matter what the topic is, especially in education, that's important. And we have to also acknowledge some of our history and understand where it is that we've came from. You know, the fact that we just desegregated schools in 1954. Okay, Black people just started to have the availability to this kind of education in 1954. So we have people still in our community that are raising kids that don't have that much education. So my husband is wrapping me up. So I'm wrapping up, but I got a lot to say.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Thank you so much, Stephanie. All right, so we're going to move into our first segment of question and answer. We're going to start off with a couple of questions, and then we would love to also input questions from the audience. So please, if you're on Facebook or if you're in Zoom, please ask questions. Please ask questions. That's going to help us to have a really great conversation. And so the first question that I want to ask our panelists, we're going to spend about a little under 20 minutes in this section. What are the most prevalent barriers to success for children of African heritage in Minnesota schools? I don't think I need to really lay out all the statistics. We hear them all the time that Minnesota has one of the greatest education systems in the country, but it's one of the worst for African heritage children on all types of spectrums. Our disparities are quite large. And so as we, have that conversation What are the things happening behind the data? What are the major barriers to success that we need to make sure we have a good understanding of when it comes to the education of our African heritage children? So feel free to jump in. Whoever wants to go first.
Okay, I'll go first. So I think, like I said, some of the barriers are just the lack of education, in our community as overall. We really need to address some of, the historical trauma that people of color have, especially those of us who are descendants of slaves. We are held to a standard right now that was created by people who already were educated, if that's making sense what I'm saying here. We can't hold people to a standard who don't have the same level of education and understanding that the laws and the rules were written by. We are at a point now where I believe that we are evolving and we're getting more education, but the biggest barrier is that legacy, that generational education. It's a little bit further than just saying, oh, we're going to help these kids, especially now, with the situation we're in where people are home. These kids have to go home. So if we're ignoring their home situation and saying, oh, we're going to help them over here, we have to learn how to start helping the Black community as a whole. And that's going to make a huge difference. If the child is gifted and has talents and goes home to a parent who doesn't have a very high education or doesn't understand the system, they're not going to get all of the benefits that they could get from the system because they're a child, and children cannot navigate this system by themselves. Educated people have a hard time navigating this system. So I think one of the biggest barriers, I think someone mentioned earlier, is that parent involvement. Sitting down, speaking with these parents, making sure that they understand what's going on. My daughter was diagnosed with autism and had an IEP. And I tell you, it took me a long time. I had to read through all that paperwork to understand it. But my daughter has never been in a special education class because she's high functioning. And I had to read the laws and I had to know the rules so that when I went into these meetings, I was able to advocate for my daughter and get her the services that would benefit her. And what I have found is that if you don't speak up, they're not giving our children of color the services that are beneficial to them. So I think that barrier of education, we really need people to step in and help the parents. Help the parents learn how to help their children. Because us giving a bunch of kids all this information is great, but it needs to also be resonating in the home. And it's not easy, but these parents should not be going into IEP meetings if they don't understand what the IEPs are. That's why our kids are in class 4 things. What people have to understand is parents have to sign off on that. They just can't stick your kid in there. So if parents are signing off on this, they're not fully understanding the gravity and the magnitude of what it is that they're signing. They're not understanding the long-term effects that putting their children in these classes are going to have. They don't understand that there are other options for your son or daughter that you can implement and you can have the public school do because your tax dollars say that you can. So I think that's the barrier.
I can go second. I think the barrier is not having enough teachers of color in front of students. I remember coming to America in '96, and for a very long time, I did not have any teachers who looked like me. And I remember getting my master's degree from the University of Minnesota, feeling very accomplished and connecting with this dynamic African-American brother, Kasim Abdurrazak, who's a clinician in St. Paul. And Kasim, I told him about the work that I was trying to do at South High School. And I was like, I want kids to be confident and to be awesome. And he said, Selma, I want you to take some time to explore what your K-12 and your higher education, like what kind of imprint has it left in you? And it was at that time that I realized that for me, I was defining success with white folks, with being white. I was internalizing, you know, the negative stereotypes that come with having lived in public housing. And it was through that recognition that I was able to start healing and really show up as a confident version of myself. And I think that's what we need in our public education, for our kids to know that they are amazing, awesome, and brilliant. And that's something that I learned from Dr. Joy Lewis, who is a local author here in the Twin Cities, healer. But I think that's what's missing in public education. We need more spaces like the Black Culture class that really is allowing children, and I'm not getting paid by the Black Culture class, I just want to say that disclaimer, but I believe in the work, because the kids need to know that they are amazing. And Ms. Whitehorn, I agree with you that parents need to be engaged, but I think we need our mostly white teaching staff to see the value of our parents. My dad and mom do not speak English, but they are my biggest supporters. When I was applying for assistant principalships, my dad kept calling me, empowering me. So when our parents show up to schools, we need our mostly white staff to see the value in our families, to see them as full partners. I remember being in a meeting where we were talking about a young African-American male who was struggling in school. And one of the first things I asked the mostly white teachers was, did you call home? And the response that I got was, nope, I didn't call home. I don't really see the point of calling home. So if that is a mindset that our teachers are operating from, then of course our kids of color will not be successful in education. I really, really hope that educators that are tuning in to this council, as you all approach the governor, that we fully fund more sections of Black culture, that we take it to Rochester, that we take it to St. Paul Public Schools, because our kids need that space to feel awesome about who they are. I know for me as a Black woman who is in her 30s, having a positive role model in Minneapolis Public Schools, I had Candace Logan. She is the equity guru, and seeing her confident self talk about equity and seeing how white people were listening inspired me to continue to be authentic, continue to have these conversations, right? So the barriers, again, is a lack of representation in teachers, the lack of healing spaces, the lack of intentionality in partnering with our communities, with our parents, the lack of having authentic, meaningful, honest, uncomfortable conversations with white staff who have belief gaps in our students' abilities, who carry a lot of misinformation and misconceptions about the abilities of our students, about the functions of our community. A lot of these inequities that we see in America is a result of injustice. Kendi Ibrahim talks about how if somebody has more, it doesn't mean that they are more. And I think that's what we need to tell our young kings and queens, that you are, if you're experiencing disadvantage, it doesn't mean that you're less than, right? That you rise from, magnificent histories, to know their histories, to know that they can transcend whatever barriers that are trying to keep them in the struggle.
Yeah, thank you for sharing all that. I got a little bit to add. I like to add with just a few little questions. They're kind of like questions or statements, but really about, so when we look at our workforce, you guys have already mentioned that, who is the teacher workforce? We know it's predominantly white teachers, right? When we look at our curriculum, what is it centered around? It's a Eurocentric curriculum. When we look at the cultural norms that our schools are based in or situated in, what is it based in? It's based in whiteness, right? So then I ask myself, why am I surprised that our white students are doing the best? I shouldn't be surprised in that, because it's set up for their success, right? And so what I am trying to do, and the work that we're trying to do in the Office of Black Student Achievement, is replicate that. You've showed us the blueprint of what works. So what I want to do is I want to get more Black teachers. I want to have an Afrocentric curriculum, and I want the cultural norms to be based in Blackness, right? So now, I'm not saying that whiteness is bad or anything, but I'm saying, can we put these differing approaches at the same level so that everybody feels valued within those spaces, right? So that their knowledge and their experiences are valued and validated in those spaces. And that's what some of the biggest barriers are for me, those three areas. You know, and I want to go with Miss Stephanie. You talked about trauma, right? And we have to also understand that there's an educational trauma that our families experience, specifically our Black and brown families, right? Going into the school system. Just because we had Brown versus Board of Education, that don't mean everything was all great, right? It was a hard fight for us to get into the educational system for them in their educational system, right? And so when I hear things about we don't want parents involved, or I'm not really wanting to call those families, well, we fought tooth and nail to get into this space. So we value education. Don't put that belief on us that we don't value education, because we do. Look at what we endured to get this equal opportunity to have education. And now you're just discrediting our process. That's a little frustrating and disheartening. And so on the inside of education, because I'm in the educational system, that's the work that I am trying to do, is to have these educators think differently about the decisions and choices that they're making. You know, you referenced about the IEP meetings. I remember my first time as a assistant principal, and I had to attend one of these IEP meetings, and they were using all these acronyms. And I'm like, man, what does that mean? What word? And I'm in education, so I was already trying to, like, can y'all slow down a little bit and figure it out? So I stopped and I started asking questions, right, throughout the meeting. And, you know, after it was over with, I got some better understanding. So I was prepared for the next time I would be in my IEP meeting to support. And when we walked out of that meeting, the parent stopped me and said, hey, thank you for that, Walker. I was like, thank you for what? They was like, for asking those questions, because I didn't know what was being said, right? And from that point on, it made me say, when I'm involved in IEP meetings, I'm gonna be the one that asks all the questions, so our families don't have to act like they know what's going on, and not, I'll just do it and won't nobody have to, hey, can you explain what that word mean or what that acronym is? Slow down through the process so they can be informed about making the decisions that they need, because sometimes we could be signing these documents not necessarily knowing exactly what we're signing them for. So I definitely hear what you're saying, Ms. Stephanie, so I appreciate that.
Thank you all. I wanted to just throw in this little quip from John Thompson. He said, why can't kids just be Black in school? But that's like, you know, it seems so simple, but it's so real. Like, why can't our kids just be fully themselves in the school environment? And a lot of you all have spoken to the fact that it's because the school environment hasn't been built around them and their needs and their norms and their cultures. A lot of you have spoken to how the teacher workforce is overwhelmingly white. Of the people who are licensed educators in the K-12 settings, over 95%. While on the other hand, we have more of a representation in school staff that aren't teachers. And I kind of want to turn it over to Malcolm as someone who has worked as an ESP, and to talk a little bit more about his experience from that perspective as well, which I think is a very valuable experience to talk about the holistic perspective of the educational experience of our children.
I appreciate it. I think one of the first places I would start, well, I would say the making sure that parental involvement is everything. And what Ms. Stephanie said, like my first principal that I worked with, when I was a special education assistant, I worked in a level 4 setting school, Harrison Education Center. This is a school that's been regularly called out about, like, you know, instances that take place there. But we got to keep in mind the majority of these instances happen because this is one of those last stops on the school to prison pipeline. And a lot of this is primarily conditioning. I think one of the things that I got to get the opportunity to do this last year and a half or so, I joined our union. You know, we talk about like unions and how they're the big change and all that jazz. But my experience with unions and how they really work and how they function, they came about like to keep white folks in positions of power when during the disbandment of slavery, right? So when Black folks started to come into the workforce, the descendants of slaves started to come into the workforce, white people started to put together unions to keep Black and brown folks out of their workforce. These unions are still running everything today. Like, you know, when we talk about the defunding of police, we got to talk about all these unions that have relationships with all these police. Like, and there's direct relationships that go into like our homes and everything. So I think there's a complete systemic approach that we can take to just having and holding accountability. The one thing that these teachers, they bank on each other. They bank on the support of one another within their classrooms, within their buildings. I'm I'm sorry, I just met you today, Ms. Salma. Like, you're going to be an AP. Like, I admire principals who come in ready to just like hold people accountable. I had a principal, Yusuf Abdullah, up there at Patrick Henry High School. This is a school that has the Black class like full on, full throttle. They do their best. Like, and their Black class teachers are folks that they know in the neighborhood. They're their basketball coaches. They're the people that they can call on when they're going through things or instances that happen in the neighborhoods that they walk, where they actually deal with these police officers that actually work in their schools too. The relationship that Black and brown youth have with policing is incredibly, I don't know how to say, like, the level of trauma it is. Like, it feels so intentional. And like, by the time they get to even having the opportunity of a Black class, they've already experienced so much. They've already gone through so much that it's like, now I gotta become less hurt by this system that has already been set up to hurt me, to even like get into the space of learning and education. But then I want to show up and play ball, but then to play ball, I have to be academically successful. There's all these things that like we put Black and brown youth through, like within like a time span of like probably like 2.5 years, that I think that we don't even consider like how big this is. And one of the biggest things I'll say is this, like this conversation with defunding police, like, and that relationship with policing in America. Like, I'm from Atlanta, like Cobb County, Georgia, right outside Atlanta, Fulton County. Like, you don't go to Atlanta and say abolish police, because all those police officers are actually working in the same neighborhoods and everything too. Like, it's a whole different conversation. I remember seeing a meme that said Minneapolis is the whole USA, and that's a lie. Like, that's impossible for Minneapolis to be replicated across this country, because the relationship that Black people have with white supremacy here in capitalism in Minneapolis is beyond like comparable to anything like, and I want to say probably like an industrial city like Atlanta. And I think like when you go into a library and it says Target, that lets you know exactly who is investing in this. And the majority of the time they are investing in just workers. They just want little worker bees out of Black and brown youth. They want them to do all this. As a matter of fact, they want Black and brown youth to do the work that we see people doing during a pandemic like COVID. So when you think about who's doing the work right now, it's Black and brown folks. And to tap into what Ms. Stephanie was saying, yeah, man, like I've seen parents like really struggle understanding these acronyms, like all these behavioral disorders. It's intentional. It's so intentional. I'll say it like this. I'm watching like organizations and nonprofits extend things like a BIP, like a behavioral intervention plan, into like work plans and workspaces. Someone told me the other day that an employee got placed on a PIP, a performance intervention plan. So there's so many systemic like approaches to like oppression that Minneapolis, Minnesota, I think uses regularly. And I think until, yes, like we can get our the scariest part about white counterparts that understand this Black struggle is they weaponize it. And I've watched it weaponized in classrooms. I watched it weaponized in the movement. So that's why right now, my biggest, like the last few years, my biggest thing has been accountability, and even trying to use a union to hold even the state accountable, the governor accountable, other unions accountable. It's a real tough fight, but I think accountability is where it's at. Like, how do you hold these teachers accountable for an experience? And that's something I think that, you know, the only way for us to really do that is like getting our young people's voices, you know, to the center of all of this.
Thank you, Malcolm. So continue to share your questions throughout the roundtable, throughout the conversation. We're going to switch gears and start to talk about a little bit more of the work ahead of us. So we've had, you know, introductory conversation about where some of the major barriers, everything from how can parents be involved, the school prison pipeline, the school, you know, the way that our students are being treated in the special education system, the lack of representation. And then also layer on the COVID-19 pandemic that we're going to get into a little bit more, which is creating even greater challenges to ensuring our students are successful. But we want to focus on where are some solutions, right? Where are some necessary solutions that can address these issues? And so we're going to segue, we're going to transition, and we're going to allow our panelists to spend a couple minutes each to just talk about what are those necessary solutions, what are the things that we should be pushing for, what are the things that they know they've seen be successful from their vantage point in the education system. And also, this is just a good space to continue to, some of you have already highlighted some of the great and amazing work you do, but you can continue to shine again or give some specific examples. But just to talk about some of the advocacy or direct service work that you're doing that we can also be supporting. So we're gonna start this section off with Mrs. Stephanie.
Okay, sorry about that. The thing was dinging or something. I don't know. I know y'all gonna get sick of my voice, but that's okay. So I'm gonna say something that some folks might not agree with at this point, but I'm just say it because that's just who I am. So, you know, because we've touched on it, but I'm just gonna say it. I've been praying on this. I've been thinking on this. You know, this COVID has really put a lot of people in a position to do a lot of self-reflection, to really try to understand how do we start to fix some of these issues that we have. You know, we got some real issues. And to be honest, I sometimes feel like the Black community is asking for help from our slave owners trying to find a new master. I'm just gonna put it out there. I really feel like it's important for the Black community to start to help the Black community. You know, we have been so conditioned that white America has to help us that we're dependent on them helping us. In the meanwhile, they sending our kids straight from school straight to prison, straight from school straight to prison, while we're waiting for them to help us. So I feel one of the solutions is going to really be for the Black community to really start to support and encourage one another. You know, really start looking who, if we have allies, use the allies we have. We spend a lot of time trying to convince other people to like us and to want us and to accept us. But all we're doing is inviting people who don't want to be involved with us to infiltrate the systems that we're trying to create for our children. That's what we're doing. It's an infiltration. You know, there's a saying that says, when people show you who they are, believe them. Why are we trying to convince people that don't want nothing to do with our kids and us to do something different? That doesn't make any sense to me. You can talk to them and tell them why they're wrong, but you're not going to change their mindset. Because I'm a loud woman, I'm a boisterous woman, I can make you say what I want you to say. But let me tell you, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if your character and your heart does not want to do it. So part of it is we need to collaborate with the people that want to make the change. And I attend a small church. I'm going to put a plug in there for it. But my pastor's an older woman, and she says some really good things. It don't matter if it's but 6 people. If it's 6 people that want to work with the change, you work with them 6 people. Stop trying to convince 90 other people to do things that they don't want to do. It's going to fail. You know, the other thing I think is going to create the change is history. We got to know our history. Know where you came from. You know, I've given my children Black history. Do you know how many young Black kids I talk to right now that don't have any idea what our history is? And our Black children are walking around here feeling entitled. And we ain't even had the right to be in a school with white people, but maybe 60 years, and you feel entitled? Do you know how many people had to die for you to sit your entitled behind there? Has anybody talked to them about this? Do they know their history? You don't know your history and you are repeating it. And that's what's happening right now. Everybody is ashamed to speak up. Tell the truth. Tell the truth. Stop trying to make people do stuff they don't want to do. That's the problem right now. We are not helping each other. The Black community is not standing together. When I see somebody that's standing, or a young mother that's in a meeting, and I see they talking over her, I stop. I don't even have to know you. Honey, do you know what they're telling you? Let me help you. Because what they're telling you is they're going to stick your child in this program. Like Michael and Malcolm said, they don't understand it. People work in the education system don't understand the rules and the thing and what's going on. So how do you expect these young mothers that don't have a high school degree and got 5 and 6, how do you think they understand what's happening? They signing off on stuff. It's like they said, it's systemic. It's set up for us to fail. The rules were not designed with Black Americans in mind, period. Not the laws, not the education system. So like Michael said, use it as an example. Let's start to build our community. We put our kids in a position where all they hear about is how great white America is. Their blurb on slavery and Black history ain't even a whole page, not in none of these history books. In Rochester, they don't even celebrate Black History Month. It's kids that don't even know we got a whole month. And they celebrate it on Nickelodeon, but they don't even mention it in a lot of the schools here in Minnesota. That's a problem. That's a problem. Somebody fought for that right to make that a national month, a national holiday. So I just think we need to get back to our roots. And we need to start there. We really need to start there. So I'm sorry for my getting on my platform there.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you so much. Let's go to Michael.
No, stay on your platform, Miss Stephanie. I'm with that. I like the platform. Do your thing. So one thing that I would, or a couple things that I would add is, so when we're talking about what are some of the solutions, so again, during Brown versus Board of Education, when we integrated schools, there's a lot of Black educators who lost their jobs, specifically teachers, right? And so we are saying that we want to have more Black teachers, but then we got to be intentional about recruiting Black teachers because of what happened in '54. As you say, know your history. You got to know that a lot of jobs went away from a lot of Black folks because they weren't allowed to teach white children, right? So we integrated the kids, but we didn't integrate the educators, we didn't integrate the curriculum, right? We didn't integrate none of those things. We just integrated those bodies so that the money could stay in those white spaces. That's what it was, right? They didn't want the money to go anywhere else. But anyway, what I'm sharing about that is that as educators, we have like the best recruiting tool in the world. We have students in our system for 13 years to recruit them to be educators. And we do a horrible job of doing that for our Black and brown students because we have to think about it. Why would I want to go work in a system that has always treated me poorly or treated me bad, right? So we have to realize that in order to create more Black and brown folks wanting to be educators, we also have to give them a different experience through the educational system. Then there's another thing that we can do that's very simple that I always ask teachers when I'm doing workshops to say, have you intentionally asked a Black or brown student or told a Black or brown student that you would be a good teacher? Just saying those things will spark the interest in that young mind and say, oh, maybe I could go into education and be a teacher. I'm good at math or I'm good at science, right? So that's one thing that we can do. Obviously, the work that we're doing in the Office of Black Student Achievement is trying to highlight this Afrocentric type curriculum, right? So talking about our history, and I'm talking about our history before 1619, things that happened before we got to this continent, not just what happened during slavery and civil rights and that sort of thing, so that they have some self-worth, some value about who they are and what they have created, and that they are the creators of a lot of knowledge, right? So how do we build that within the curriculum? And that's, again, about creating curriculum so that it's not just Eurocentric, but it's also Afrocentric. So those are a couple of the solutions that we can instill that are kind of quick and easy that we can do regularly. But again, it takes the change of the mindset and beliefs of the people who are impacting these young people as they're going through our system. And it takes learning, because we have to realize that our teachers are only teaching what they were taught to teach in their programs that they went through. Right? So we're asking them, and we're pushing on them to say, hey, you got to go learn something else, because the customers you have sitting in front of you, you got to respond to your customers, right? Because if we're doing that Eurocentric curriculum, we are sending two messages, whether we want to believe it or not. We're sending two messages that white students, hey, you guys did all this great stuff and you discovered this and you did that. Cool. But the other message you send in when you don't acknowledge any of the Black and brown folks or indigenous folks, you're saying like, y'all didn't really do nothing. So now I'm sitting in that space like, am I even valued? Do I even, right? So we got to be able to change these narratives and center other narratives in our spaces so that we can breed that self-worth, that value, that they know that they are capable and able to do things versus these deficit mind frames that we provide a lot in our educational system.
Great. Thank you so much, Michael. Next, we're going to have Salma answer the question.
Thank you. I think the solution has a lot of different areas to it. One of the things that we definitely need to do is invest in parent educational series. I do some work with a nonprofit in the Somali community called the Somali American Parent Association. And something that we've done with COVID in place is having virtual educational series to talk to parents about the role that they can play in their kids' education. I know that in Minneapolis, we have the SAPEO program. I know how important it can be for parents to know that you don't have to speak English or write English or read English to create a learning environment in the home for your child. So much of America is really about not protecting the dignity and worth of our Black and brown folks. And something that we have to do as educators in whatever role that we play is when parents engage with us, how do we meet them with respect, with integrity, and really see them as full human beings. And again, knowing that you have to make those phone calls home, not only when the kid is in trouble, but when the kid is doing well. I also really think that we have to hire more folks of color, not just to do behavior support, not just to do to be behavior deans, but we need Black administrators, we need Black social workers, we need Black counselors. We need to be intentional in creating opportunities for students to talk about career options, right? I know that for me, I sort of just fell into youth work because I've always loved youth work, but I don't recall ever having an intentional conversation about becoming an educator. I know in my work at South High School, I've tried my very best to create conditions in which I spoke to kids, created programming such as the bilingual career talks, intentionally bringing people that look like the kids so they can see themselves as success, right? When kids can identify with success, they can know that Amber Jones is successful in this way, and I don't have to be Amber Jones. I can just be Selma, and I can be successful just the way I am, right? And I also think it's so important for us to talk about mental health. We have trauma, but trauma is not something that is unique to the Black community. We need our white educators to acknowledge that they have trauma too. And if they're not treating their trauma, if they're not coming from a place of wholeheartedness, a place of, wellness, then they take that trauma and put it on children. And as a result to that, children are not successful in the schools. So it's a holistic approach of treating the student as a full human being, seeing the humanity in that student, seeing the humanity in our parents, and also a call for our white allies, co-conspirators, whatever the title is, for them to do the work, not to just learn about me as a Somali woman, not to just learn about, my community, but really to learn about themselves, to learn about what their triggers are, to learn about what their baggage is and how that's showing up in their teaching. Because if they're not well, our kids will not be well.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Salma. Then we're going to round out this section with remarks from Malcolm.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick. I'll say, in my experience, one of the biggest stakeholders I think that I've seen in any educational system, and Michael, you tapped on this, is like, who's like our best, like who's gonna do this the best is the folk that have the best experience with what we do. Like our custodies are gonna know like what we're doing. They're gonna want to be a part of this program, this family. Like they're gonna want to enjoy this. My biggest, I remember organizing trainings and such, like with educational support professionals who tend to be like primarily Black and brown folks, like in the education system, that are workers. But I will say this, they have the largest and richest experience that you'll ever find. The biggest stakeholders that I think Minneapolis Public Schools has, from my experience, would be your educators who graduated Minneapolis Public Schools, whose parents probably went to Minneapolis Public Schools, then they came back and worked at Minneapolis Public Schools, and their children also go to Minneapolis Public Schools. There are several people whose grandchildren also go to Minneapolis Public Schools, and there's like just an extension of experience there that is so valuable. If you're in Minneapolis, Lynn Crockett, she'll let you know things left and right, up and down, about how things should be. There's a reason why certain schools are still open. It's because people advocate real tough. I think Stephanie, like talking about like the advocacy and parents understanding, and the truth is, like, here's the thing. I want to like spend all the time and educate Black and brown families on this oppressive system, special education for one of them, for example, that is, to me, it's real scary, it's horrific. But I'll say this, they all know that it's wrong or something is wrong. And for us, like as educators or those of us who work in administration, like we have to just say like, you know what, you might not speak in the language, but I know exactly what you're telling me. You're telling me we're not doing something right. And like for us to be innovative and getting families and getting the culture involved and incorporated in the classroom is one thing. But, you know, if we're talking holistically, the Black class needs to be something that runs for like 12 to 16 hours a day. There needs to be accessibility for students like through around the clock. When we talk about when our students are getting in the most trouble, it happens between the hours of like 2 and 7 p.m. Guess where they're at? Like they leave the school and go direct into like, I want to just like, you know, be a kid, but I haven't also been taught like how I can be a kid or a safe way to be a kid sometimes too. So like, and I think those are giving the kids the opportunity to experience something and double back and be like, hey man, I dropped the ball. And like, it's okay for you to drop the ball. At the end of the day, I need you to come home. I need you to come back tomorrow. So I think like, what does it look like for us to like take it beyond just classroom hours and business hours? And I think that's also been the disconnect for a lot of our white counterparts, is because they don't have to see the kids in the neighborhood. If I walk down the street and I didn't show up for a student in class, they're gonna let me know when I go up the block. They're gonna let me know not when they show up. So accountability is real for all of us.
Thank you, Malcolm. Man, you bringing up at school time is so real, just because I've just been able to see over like my childhood to now, just the intentional divestment away from out of school time experiences for young people, and how that is affecting them. And even as we segue into the panelist Q&A, I really would like for us to have a conversation about how young people have had to navigate this pandemic, which is already traumatic on so many levels. Just seeing the thousands of people die and the hundreds of thousands contract or millions contract the virus, but also being in an environment where they're disconnected from their community, their friends, and pretty much being asked to just kind of sit around. And in some ways, students were already struggling with that because maybe they didn't have the out of school time opportunities that they should have, right? And there were some conversations that we were having earlier in the spring about how young people were being affected by just being in this time, right? And how that's affecting their mental health and their social and emotional health as well. So I would love to, hear some thoughts about that. But as we, transition to this last section before we close, and continue to send your questions in, we'll try to incorporate as many as we have time. Taking the last few months where students were in distance learning at the beginning of this pandemic, going into the summer, and now we're preparing for the fall, where essentially the state decision has been, here are frameworks, districts, please decide what's going to work best for your local district. And a lot of the major districts in the Twin Cities are moving towards starting the year with distance learning, but we know that, regardless of where you are in the state, that might be a different reality for you. But as we are coming into this new year, still with the pandemic ravaging our communities, what do we need to make sure is in place to ensure that African heritage children are going to not fall further behind? Also, what do we need to make sure that our teachers and our education support professionals are supported in this ongoing, not just educational environment, but economic environment as well, making sure that everyone is being taken care of during this time, as well as how making sure parents are supported. So who wants to tackle that beast of a question?
I always got something to say. I do think that regarding, how we're going to handle the COVID situation, I've given it quite a bit of thought, because I do have a 12-year-old daughter who is in school and is directly affected by it. To be honest, I've done a lot of thinking on this, and I don't really have a clear-cut answer because of the fact that, it is so dependent on the parents being available. And I just got to go, it's really got to start in the home. At this time, the home is so important. It's so, so, so important. There are some children, especially in the Black and brown communities, that are going to be exposed to things that they were not exposed to previously because their parents would drop them off at the Boys and Girls Club or drop them off at this program and that program. So some of these kids are not even in environments where learning can really happen. I'm just going to say it. They're not in the proper environment for learning to really happen. You have people that have multiple children and in small apartments or different things. I mean, I'm not saying it cannot be done, but to throw people into this situation without the proper skills, without the proper training, without the proper know-how, I have cried. I'm gonna just tell y'all the truth. My kids have been in some protests and different things, and my children have expressed to me some of the concerns that they have with some of their friends that, are Black or what have you, and some of the difficulties they have and how they've tried to reach out to them, how kids are trying to help other kids, because kids are smart. They know kids even know that other kids are having problems. As a parent, you try to reach out to other parents. One of the things that we didn't touch on too much is the level of distrust. That's really the biggest thing in the Black community. There are a lot of things that are available to us, but you have to, the reason why I keep bringing up the history is because you have to understand that before 1954, white people didn't want anything to do with Black people. We had ours and they had theirs, okay? Everything that involved Black people interacting with white people for the majority of time always ended up in us being tricked or lynched or raped. So people have this trauma. My grandparents have this trauma. So now they bring kids and they put them into a system that's mostly white. They don't allow the Black teachers to come, as Michael touched on. And even though they're getting information, they don't trust that information that they're getting. So I really don't have a definitive answer on how we start to break down that wall and that barrier that Black Americans have. Amongst this panel, the few of us, if we're real about it, can tell you we got family members that's on drugs. We got family members that's in prison. We got family members live in the hood, got roaches, all of this. Let's be real, okay? But we were strong-minded enough to make it out. You see what I'm saying? But everybody isn't. And it really pains me because we do need a solution. Some of the things that I've looked at is really getting more education on the ACEs training, which I've had, which is really amazing, which really kind of gets down to the core of what's going on, some of that painful stuff that people don't want to talk about. But as some other panelists have touched on, we're going to have to do that. We're going to have to get down to the core. We're going to have to see what's going on in these homes, because if we don't, we're going to have a whole generation of kids that didn't get their education properly because they didn't have the correct access. Just giving some kids some iPads, so here in Rochester, they've provided the kids with some iPads or some kind of technology to work from home. And I appreciate that. And, they've tried to make sure that internet is accessible. But those two things alone are not going to be enough to be able to help children have a healthy learning environment. Do these kids have a desk to sit at? Do they have a place where they could go and learn? Have they eaten today? All of these things are going to make a difference, in my opinion, as to whether or not our kids are successful. And besides the people that want to do it, going out there and knocking on those doors, because to be truthful, a lot of us know where those people are, but we're too busy. We're too busy to go check on them. So what it's really going to take is people saying, you know what, I know so-and-so's mom is not doing that good. I'm going to go over there, check and see if her daughter did her homework, see if she needs some help today. But that's what it's going to take. It's going to have to take people really understanding and being concerned, and not just sitting behind their laptop and sitting behind their computer and going, oh, we got to have the state make a change. It's going to take that action. It's going to take that footwork. People are going to have to get out into that community and knock on those doors and ring those doorbells. Malcolm and Michael, people that have been in those areas who can still go into those areas. That's what my husband does, Bud. You know, he's able to still go back into the hood. And when he goes in the hood, he brings positive things. That's what's going to make the change, not us running away, you know, getting our education and sitting on panels. We got to go back out there and help our people.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I want to make sure we get a couple more voices in on this question. Who else wants to hop in?
I think I can go next. I think that much of education, we're playing catch up. I think for the most part that many educators did not establish authentic relationships with kids pre-COVID. So now with COVID in place, it's really hard to get kids to engage with the learning. And Minneapolis Public Schools, where I most recently worked, we don't have the one-to-one technology. So we had to figure out which kids needed technology, which kids needed the internet, and that took a long time. So I think the way forward now for the fall is to make sure that our teachers are doing all right, because I think what I saw play out in spring is that teachers were stressed out. They weren't prioritizing their own mental health needs, their own social emotional needs, and they were, for the most part, replicating the regular school day into online. And that's not fair for kids. We really, really have to prioritize the well-being of everybody. We have to acknowledge that COVID is real, it's happening, and that kids' mental health, they're dealing with it very differently. Mental health at the school that I worked at, kids had access to mental health practitioners. But right now in the home, they don't have access to mental health clinicians that they can talk to. So we have to really prioritize the mental health needs of our students, making sure that the kids have the necessary resources to do well, and also paying attention to the teachers and making sure that they have the support that they need, that they have permission to just be. Learning will happen, but well-being is the focus of now, right? And making sure that our kids that need resources, whether it's, connecting with adults that they trust. I hope and pray that the Black Culture class will be available virtually for the students to hold space, for them to process through the feelings that they have, their lived experience, but really making sure that we have the resources, that we have the bilingual staff necessary to engage with our families who English is not their first language, that we prioritize the engagement, that we meet the needs of our families, making sure that there is food scarcity, making sure that families know where to get food, making sure that families know where to pick up the iPads and whatnot, and just letting people know that learning will happen, but take care of yourself and be well.
Yeah, I would go behind that and just share that what we did in our department at the very start of COVID is that we did wellness checks with our students that were in our classrooms. So we made specific pointed phone calls to check in on the students and the families to see if there were anything that we could support them with. Not that we had a whole lot, but maybe we had some resource that we can connect them up to, and to get the information and then pass it on and utilize it that way. So I think that we should definitely continue to do that. I think that will be a huge benefit for people. To have those wellness checks, because people want to know that you care about them. Again, like, how do you just show that you care? And did you see me as a human, that I'm dealing with some craziness that's going on that we all are trying to deal with, right? The other piece, I think you already hit on it, Selma, but I just want to make sure that I hit on it again, because sometimes we got to hear things 2, 3, 4 times in order for it to stick in. The one thing about, we shouldn't be trying to replicate school virtually. Like, it should not be the same thing that happened in the face-to-face version of school. It's not going to do that, and we should not be trying to do that. How do we be more creative, and what I would call, how do we differentiate in this new space? So what can we be doing differently to engage students? How do we use platforms that they already have access to? They know how to create little videos, and so how do we get them to use that type of knowledge and information to answer some of our academic type questions, right? So it's about us being more creative on our side to pose that. So that's kind of what we do in our department. We are very creative and innovative. So we created our classroom where it was like a big old Facebook model, where we would post questions. Now everybody gets to comment. We get to go in there and comment on students. We had them do a TikTok video challenge around like speakers and quotes that they had. So we did things that were academic, but it was fun and then something that they can do, but it was still having them think critically. It was still having them learn and be engaged. So I think we just got to look at it differently and make sure that we don't allow just the technology to dictate how we interact, right? So because it's, distance, they use distance. I'm just saying it's virtual learning. Don't mean we got to be distant from each other. We can figure out how to be connected still. And that connection means we got to be intentional about using the resources that we have. Like I said, phone calls, text messages. We use Facebook Messenger to connect with some of our kings and queens. We can get to them on the phone. Like we reached out, we created a Snapchat account and we sent some of our assignments out through that. Like we try to just, flood the market in any kind of way we can connect. We would talk to other students like, hey, have you talked to Tyrone? Because he ain't signed in for a couple of days. I know you talk to him all the time. So what's up? How can you tell Tyrone to give me a call or check in with us? So we were trying to utilize the connections that we had to make sure they know that we were thinking about them or wanted them to be successful. So those types of things. And is it extra? Yeah, it's going to be a little bit extra work. But if we are truly about changing outcomes, then we got to be willing to do that little extra work for our babies.
Oh. Any other last thoughts on this question? Malcolm, did you have any thoughts before we transition to our closing?
Honestly, I would just say, like, accept the challenge. Like, like Michael Walker said, like, like we caught ourselves in this position of like, oh, what does education look like? And again, man, like me, like I've been in the classrooms and try to like give these little like, hints and stuff to teachers. And I'm gonna be honest with you, like a lot of my experience has just been teachers who don't want to do it. Like, and there's a lot of complacency here in the education system in Minnesota. There's no like, hey man, like, this ain't gonna last too long. Like, because they know they can be like, we'll holler at this union and I'm gonna start a whole bunch of, whatever I can and, protect these rights that I have. We live in a state that, an educational system that literally is established to like hold everybody in their little positions and allow them to continue to do this. And like, if you stressed out because like you don't know how to make a phone call, like, like it's simple things like if you got to put a letter in the mail, put a letter in the mail. Like, like if you got to go knock these doors before school starts, go knock these doors. I remember we did that at Harrison my first year with a we gonna go knock these doors. Some of these teachers were scared to walk through the door. I don't blame them for not wanting to go through some of these neighborhoods, but if you're committed to educating this young person, you need to meet them where they're at. To force a child to like come into a system that was already set up for like them to not be there is like a lot. So I think it's a matter of challenging ourselves and to be welcome to like fall down and get back up. Like we're in a new space now in day and age where like everything should be new. And I think it's like accepting that challenge, like we'll really get there.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you all. Thank you all so much for your, just all of your great opinions and feedback and just expertise on this issue. We're in unprecedented times. We're figuring things out as we go. We need a lot of grace for each other and be willing to endure with each other, right? So I just thank you so much. So we're going to transition to our closing remarks. And I just want to give you all just a 1 minute space to just send your closing remarks, your send-offs. What is something encouraging and inspiring you can share with the guests and people who are going to watch this roundtable after it's left up for viewing? And share what inspires you, what keeps you going in this work before we close out for tonight. So I'm gonna turn to Salma to kick us off.
I really want to thank you, Amber, for this opportunity. It's being part of this panel has been really awesome, and I've learned a lot from each panel member. My closing remarks, I've fallen in love with Dr. Benita Love. She is the author of We Want to Do More Than Survive. And one of her quotes says, often people are waiting for a leader to come along. You don't have to wait for someone else. I know that's true for me. I started off as a very quiet, a Somali woman who was told at a very young age that to be quiet meant to be modest. And I still think I'm modest, but I'm not as quiet. So I want to encourage every single person on, you know, who's watching this now, who's watching it in the future, to find out what brings you passion, find out what brings you joy, and lead with that. When it comes to education, we need everybody has a role to play, right? Michael Walker is playing his role. Malcolm Wells is playing his role. Stephanie Whitehorn is playing her role. I'm doing the best I can to play my role. Figure out what your role is and play that role, be that role. Know that you are enough just the way that you are. Know that you have authority to speak truth, not your truth, to speak truth, right? And know that you are not alone. There's an African proverb that says, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. I think that's the African proverb, but either way, just know that you have a community, that you are not alone, that you are the change that we have been waiting for, and partner with people, reach out to people, and know that we got this, and our kids deserve the best, and that we, even as adults, it's not enough just to survive. We all deserve to thrive, and we do that through freedom. We do that through knowing our awesomeness and knowing our history.
Thank you, thank you. Michael, your final words for tonight.
I gotta go off the song. She just like hit a home run, man. Like, what am I supposed to do after that? I guess I would just share that for me, it's really about the final words. I guess final thought is making sure you know that, as she said, your voice matters and that you have something brilliant to share. The other piece I would say is don't be upset or be mad at folks that are interrupting. We need the interrupters, right? It's like John Lewis. We need those good troublemakers, right? So how can we all go out and be good troublemakers?
Yes, yes, rest in peace to Representative John Lewis. Just his life, major loss for us, but major gain for the spirit. Mrs. Stephanie Whitehorn, your last words.
Why she say my name like that? Like she don't want to say it no more. That's all right. That's all right. So just real quick, final words. First, I just want to thank everybody for allowing me to be a part of this, and thank you for your patience with me and my ranting. And I send my apologies that I get a little bit emotional. But I do have something I want to leave everybody with. One, you know, like Selma said, I just want everybody to understand that you matter. You know, whether you talk too much, whether you talk too little, whether you're big, whether you're fat, whether you're round, whether you're skinny, be who you are and don't be ashamed of who you are. You know, I'm talkative. I am who I am. I'm a big old talkative woman. But embrace yourself, love yourself, and learn to know that you are not a mistake. However you are is how you were supposed to be designed. And as I tell my children, you were created. Okay, you are a creation. You are a unique creation. And there are two quotes that I keep hearing all week. One is B.B. King, that the beautiful thing about learning is that no one can take it away from you. Okay, your knowledge is a powerful thing. I got a quote from my grandma too that said, don't be an educated fool. That's what my pastor also says. Don't let your education get so before you that you lose your common sense. We want our people to be educated, but we want you to also retain who you are. You don't have to lose who you are because you become educated. You know, I'm going back to school. You can still be a Black woman. You can still embrace who you are. You can still have your greens and cornbread and have a PhD. You don't have to be somebody different in order to be an educated person. And my final thought is this, and this is deep, y'all, because y'all probably didn't even know I'm this deep, but I'm finna give you something deep because I heard this quote by Thomas Edison that said, vision without execution is a hallucination. I'll say it again. Vision without execution is a hallucination. That's deep right there. And again, I just want to thank y'all for allowing me to be a part of this. And I hope that you all are blessed. And I appreciate the work that each and every one of you are doing in the community for the children and the people of color. I hope to collaborate with all of you at some point in my lifetime that we can continue this motion and continue it moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Stephanie. I did not say your name like that. Malcolm, you get the last words.
I would say, first of all, yeah, thank you, Amber. Like, you know, it's been dope, like working in education all these years with one another. Michael, you know, I've sat in your classrooms and seen all the stuff, and I can't wait to see what everybody's about to do. Someone being principal, Stephanie continue like the advocacy work. I think it's the advocacy, man. It's like really meeting our families where they're at, and making sure that their voices is heard, getting them involved, getting all these other organizations incorporated into what happens in our classrooms. Like, yeah, don't let the distance learning keep you away from connecting. And I think like this system is going to bet on us not being able to connect for this next like 6 to 9 months. This system wants us to like really just be like, you know what, we ain't got the tech, we don't have the internet, we don't have it. I think showing up for our young people really is like getting these other industries and entities and people who maybe don't have kids involved in like getting involved in young people's lives. And it looks like sending some money, sending some dollars, internet setup, like walking people through these tech things. Like it's not a lot. And I think it really is just a commitment. And what does it look like getting us committed? It really is like the future. Like I think like my biggest timestamp right now is just 5 years. 5 years ago, Jamar Clark was killed. And you know, today, look at where we are with George Floyd. Keep in mind, kids graduate in high school 4 years. I had kids who were on the front lines during Jamar Clark, and they're on the front lines just now over South in the 3rd Precinct. So that's an experience that I don't know if Minneapolis Public Schools is ready to talk about that. But if that is not in the history books in the next year or two, then we really have a problem. Then we really have something to address. We can't, if we don't go ahead and turn this, I don't even say history, let's turn this narrative. We really dropped the ball. So I hope like we give this to the young people like moving forward.
Yes, thank you, Malcolm. And I have been thinking about that a lot, just about a whole generation that has grown up in this modern Black Lives Matter movement. And what is that, how is that affecting their just perspectives on the future and their aspirations for abundance and prosperity. So that's definitely something we need to carry in the work and help. You know, we talked about history, making sure that students have history so that they can have a perspective that's larger than just their experience. And so I just want to thank you all. Thank you so much, Salma. Thank you so much, Malcolm. Thank you so much, Stephanie. Thank you so much, Michael, for joining us this evening and for kicking off this Conversations with the Council series. Thank you to all of our guests who have tuned in through Zoom or through Facebook. And just, I'm really excited for the work ahead. It's hard work, but it's necessary work for our state, for our communities here in Minnesota. And so as we wrap up, I just want to share a couple of brief announcements. The council is busy, y'all. The work has not stopped. And so I want to talk to you a little bit about that work. The first thing is that we do have upcoming roundtables throughout August and September. This is the first of 4. We're going to have conversations on public safety, on economic development, and on public health. And so if you haven't registered for that, you can go on our Facebook page to get more information on how to register or to just get information on when the events are happening. They're going to be on Thursdays at 4 o'clock throughout August and September. We also have our next council meeting that's coming up on August 18th. We typically have them on the second Tuesdays, but since there is an election day, there's a primary, we have rescheduled that meeting to August 18th. And that is a great opportunity to learn more about the council, to see the council, the actual council in action. And we also invite several guest speakers throughout the state enterprise to talk about their work and how it affects our community. So you can always tune in on Facebook at 6 p.m. On August 18th for this month's meeting. Also, we have Jasmine, our counterpart, my counterpart here at the council on the legislative and policy side. She hosts a phenomenal, let me just pause there, a phenomenal and very thorough legislative training. So if you are interested in learning a lot more on, all right, so how do I track bills? How do I give testimony? How do I set up meetings with my legislator? Who's my legislator? I don't know. All of these things, and also talking specifically about different policy issues and how it relates to our community. You need to participate in one of her trainings. You can get more information about that on our website at mn.gov/CMAH so that you can get registered for those trainings. So the final thing I want to share is that if you have not heard already, that our executive director, Justin Terrell, is transitioning out of his role. We are really excited for his next journey in his career, and we thank him for his service to the council. With that being said, the position description for the executive director position has opened. That posting will be open until August 25th, and that information can be found on the state the careers website. You can find the job posting there. We've also posted a link on our Facebook page as well. So if you know people who would be qualified for that role, please send them their way. We want to make sure we're continuing the legacy and the great work that has been built over the past 4 years, and especially over the past 2.5 years that Justin has been the executive director. So with that being said, I want to once again thank you all for your time. We are really grateful for this conversation. Please share the video. It will stay up on our Facebook page after we go offline. So please continue the conversations and please stay connected to the council. We love you all. Have a great evening.